have here with us Linda Wawrzyniak. And I'm very excited to have Linda with us. She's going to provide us a fantastic experience and perspective from the major leagues. So Linda, please do join us. Linda is an international human development and transformation consultant to high performance organizations such as the Chicago Cubs and the Los Angeles Angels, to just name a few. She's an expert in transitional multicultural talent from around the globe. She founded Major League Consulting, where she created the PAR test of adjustments and the V+1 system of improvement, which has helped hundreds of professional athletes perform at their highest level and become positive role models in society. Linda, thank you for taking the time to share your perspectives with us. We're very much looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to hopefully sharing something new and a little different today. The title of my presentation is $1 Million Adjustments, and I think this is very appropriate for what I have seen in the world of professional baseball. But I hope that in terms of digital transformation, we'll be able to give you some new perspectives that might make some of what you're trying to do hopefully a little easier and get you and your team to the major leagues. The first thing I want to talk about is kind of what you're going to see. So what you can expect from this program and from this session is you're going to actually see a never seen before tool from professional baseball. I will say that this is a tool that we've been working on for a number of years, and you are going to be the first audience to see this. So I'm excited to share it with you and also to hear your feedback as to what you think you can do with this tool and how immediately helpful it might be for you. So this is kind of an exciting moment for you as well, because hopefully it's going to be something that you've never seen before. In addition, I'm going to give you one practical suggestion that you can use today to help you hit a home run with your transformation. But first, I need to give you a little background. I need to tell you how this whole thing started for context. So every professional baseball team has something called player development. And what this is, it's basically a system of coaches and trainers and dietitians and all these people who support young men as they start climbing the levels of baseball in order to make it to the best level, the highest level, which is the big leagues. So all of us are part of this player development group. And I was working with one team at the time. It was called the Diamondbacks, the Arizona Diamondbacks. You may be familiar with them. And they came and we would do classes in this press conference room, and a lot of things were going very, very well. I learned right away that there wasn't really a good system for helping these young men transition into the United States, as well as take the statistical knowledge that was being thrown at them and figure out how to transfer that into their gameplay. So started to come up with some systems myself, because my background is actually in technology and engineering. So I had a lot of access to systems. And one thing I did was I started to incorporate some new things that they had never seen before, which then gave me an opportunity to get invited to spring training. So in 2009, I went for the first time with my husband to Arizona, and we actually attended our first spring training. Spent a lot of time on the field that day and learned a lot of new things. I think I was just as shocked to see some things as they were shocked to see me. At the time, I was the only woman walking around, and I had a very interesting encounter happen that day. I met a man named Dave Hansen. You see on the left here, he was a Dodgers player, but he also played for other teams. And at the time I met him, he was a coach. So on the right side, you see his pictures, 3 pictures of different teams that he's been coaching with. I thought he was a player at first. I could tell he looked a little older. But he came up to me and we started to talk, and he asked me what I was doing with the team, and I asked him. And then I asked him a question that his answer I'll never forget. I said, what is it about baseball that you remember the most? What is the most impactful thing in your life from baseball? I thought he was going to say something like, you know, the interviews, the constant grind of the season, the different types of stadiums. I was expecting all these interesting things for him to say, but he didn't say that at all. What he said was that life is about patience and adjustments. And that really struck me because it was very simple, but actually extremely profound. And I thought to myself, why is that, of all the things he's done in his career, why would that be the thing that he would choose to tell me? So it really stuck with me through that first season, and then following into the next season, I started to hear this word adjustments all the time. Started to make sense. So it wasn't too long ago, I'm sure maybe you've seen the movie Moneyball, but sabermetrics started to enter into baseball. And it started out slow and then it came crazily fast. And I was part of this baseball system when this transformation was happening. This was truly a digital transformation. Players were trying to figure out how they were being looked at, how they were being measured and scored. And at the same time, front offices were trying to maximize their investments because these were million-dollar players, multi-million-dollar players. And they were also trying to figure out, how do we get the most out of these players? How do we measure every single thing they do? What matters? How does it matter? What are we looking at? So enter in a lot of data scientists, and everyone started looking at a lot of things. And there was WHIP and WAR. You see all these various measurements. So pretty soon we were looking at the player, not really as a human, but as a machine, as a system. And if you're measuring any kind of system, and you are, I mean, I've been watching some of these presentations prior to mine, and you know, we can easily measure a mechanical system. We can look at pressures, temperatures, we can put sensors on all kinds of things, and we can get data that tells us how well is our system functioning. But when you do that to a human, there are some different things that come out of this. So when you're looking at this new science of analyzing people for a specific outcome, a performance, then it started to create some very interesting gaps in baseball. One of the biggest ones that I saw was this data adjustment connection. So it didn't dawn on me till later when I started to get a number of coaches coming up to me and saying, hey, how does this guy do this? What do you know about him psychologically? What do you know about, what do you know about him? How does he do things? How does he learn? And, it didn't dawn on me until I really started watching a lot of games, what was really, what the real question was. And the real question was that the coach's job is to look at a player when they are not playing well and help them figure out what's going wrong. And then on top of that, help them learn how to change what is going wrong. Is it your foot placing? Is it your weight on your hip? What is it that's happening? And so now with all this data-driven information coming from front offices, the coaches were given this information too. And now they had to balance, how do I take the data and transfer this into a way to teach this young man? And at the same time, the young man was looking at the data and saying, how do I make this, how do I do better? But I don't really know if I want to increase my batting average, how do I do that in a way that I am going to really see it on the field? And this coach here doesn't really need necessarily understand that I'm focused now on stats. I'm not as focused on some of the things that he was telling me earlier. So suddenly the coach and the players were kind of going like this. There was this disconnect, and neither one could really help each other. Some tried, and of course there were some things that did happen, but this gap has even widened further now in baseball than it ever has been. So what I did is I started a quest to understand this word adjustment. The coaches were always saying, we need to help these players adjust. The problem was when I would ask a coach, well, what exactly is an adjustment? Nobody could tell me. Nobody could define it. in a way that made sense to the player, to me. And so no wonder the players were feeling a little disconnected. They would just say, we need to make an adjustment. And I think part of that reason is because in baseball, there's so much failure that no one wants to say the word failure. In systems that we look at, we say the word failure all the time. If you're in a, if you're talking about mechanics, you're saying, oh, there was a mechanical failure. I mean, there's nothing personal attached to that. There's nothing emotional. But however, you don't really say that in baseball and pro sports in general. You don't say that in the NFL. You don't say that in the NHL. You don't say failure. So here I had some of that background. I walked in and I was like, we can't say failure. No one's talking about failure. So this is why I think what made adjustments so hard for people to get their hands around. So I decided to start studying it and pulling it apart in any way and every way I could. I put my data scientist hat on and I said, okay, what is it that we need to know about adjustments in order to help these players take what they're getting from the front office and what sabermetrics and StatCast and all these pieces of information are feeding to them, and how do we transfer that from what they're getting into their brain. So started to come up with some ways to measure adjustment, and called on some friends and called on some colleagues, kind of assembled a team and did this in order to really understand how to help the player and the team. And out of all this work, something came out of it called the Performance Adjustment Response Test. This test has never been commercially available, so it's only ever been used in baseball. And what I did is I started to test and see things that were remarkably interesting. And then I started to wonder, could what we're seeing from the human side of this and the way people are making adjustments outside of the field, could there be a correlation on the field? So I decided to do some analysis, and we took the PAR data. And so here's an example on the left of a player who actually took the PAR test, and he was pretty flat. There wasn't a whole lot of adjustment. Then we said, okay, what does his field performance look like? And we ran the data, and interestingly enough, he was a pitcher, and his K per 9, which means strikeouts per 9 innings, was also pretty flat. And we were amazed. But we really weren't in some ways, because a long time ago, someone told me that how we do anything is how we do everything. So it became more and more interesting as we started to run more and more players. We took the PAR test and we ran it against the data. We did pitchers, we did outfielders, we did catchers, everybody. And then we ran them over a number of years to say, does it vary from year to year? What are we seeing? And we found that this test was very stable, and it also was very simple, something that players could understand when we explained, okay, if you're seeing that your K per 9 isn't improving, it's not going anywhere, we need to improve your adjustment ability. And then immediately they could see that connection, which was the first time somebody could show it to them in a way that made sense to both mind and body. So when you look at a system and what causes the variables, I mean, I was very well trained in understanding variables in a system. So, as I said before, time, temperature, pressures, different things along those lines. I said, now, what are the variables of human performance? And so as we studied the PAR test and tried to help players understand how to make improvements, we had to know that. So one of the first things we knew that had an impact on performance is belief. Belief is how much confidence do I have in myself, and how much confidence do I have in the organization, and how much confidence do I have in the people who are teaching me the things about my job, my work. Beliefs are really important, and it is one of those things outside of our typical statistical sciences, but it really did play a part in how people do make adjustments. The other thing we saw was strategic actions had a huge part in this. Most people do not realize that there are 4 basic strategies, and they don't operate from those. They might pick 1, maybe 2, and then those become ingrained in everything they do. So until they understand what strategic methods there are, and that when and how to use them, they don't know how or when to use them. So it creates this pattern of doing the same thing over and over. The third thing is timing. Now, what's very fascinating to me about this, I'm not talking about external time, like the time on our phones or the time on our clocks. I'm talking about our internal timings, our internal rhythm. What I've learned is that everyone has brain pulses that create an internal chronometer, and things slow that up or speed it up or slow it down. And that has a lot to do with chemical reactions, DNA, different things, but it also has to do with environmental factors. So these are some things that we started playing with and experimenting with to see how we could manipulate time. And that was, it was fascinating to see how it actually affected performance. The fourth thing is information synthesis. This basically means that how do you look into something that you're seeing and how do you scan it, pull out what you need, and then make decisions based on that. Most young people today are not good at information synthesis. They're great at shallow information. They Google search and they can look for a lot of different things, but they are not able to synthesize lots of data to really understand what they need to do. I mean, this is why machines are doing more and more of this. But if we can teach people the basics of information synthesis, this is really going to help them in their overall performance. And the last piece is obvious. It's knowledge. What do we already know and what can we apply and what do we have in our memories? So knowledge is a key part of how we make adjustments. Now, obviously, these are baseball players, so there's a huge physical component to this as well. But if you compared, and this is one thing that I looked at very closely, if you compared two athletes with very similar physical talent levels, and then you look at these 5 variables, you already know, we could predict who was going to make it to the big leagues and who wasn't. And that was phenomenal. We were able to now make predictions based on the PAR test. So I want to give you a very, very abbreviated version of what the process of adjustment looks like for a person. So I did this kind of crude little drawing, but hopefully it'll give you an idea. So if we look at failure and uncertainty or change as the triggering event, something that is going to cause us to want to make an adjustment. Now in baseball, there's a lot of failure, so that isn't a big triggering event. But for you and other people who are working in different types of organizations, it might be that change is the triggering event, or even uncertainty could be the triggering event. And we look over here and we see that we're trying to get to some level of success. That's what we're aiming for. So we have this starting point and we have this ending point. So we start out with the IS and knowledge is information, synthesis, and knowledge. So somebody tells us, hey, we're going to start a new digital platform, or you need to learn this app, whatever it is. We say, okay, what do we already know about this? So we might do a very quick little search, and then we also pull back what we have in our knowledge already, and then we usually take an action. Most people will generally start an action of some kind. And then they'll go along until they get to this stopping point. Something didn't happen. It didn't work out the way we wanted it to. It wasn't exactly what we thought. Suddenly we kind of get stopped. Or maybe it's just that we start the application and we don't know how to move forward or how to really use it well. So we kind of put it down. At that moment, our beliefs start to come into this, and so does time, because we are now starting to say, how long do I really want to do this? Is this really important? And then everyone's time in that is different. So those are the kind of things, this is kind of the first step of an adjustment. Then we say, okay, let's start again. Let's go back into that app. Maybe somebody comes and gives us a little bit more knowledge. We have knowledge and information, again, synthesis. We take another action, but this time it's more strategic. This is where we're operating on whatever strategies we already have or don't have. And again, like I said, most people don't have a lot of strategies. So they're going to go ahead and do what they kind of already have in their knowledge bank. So they start with a strategic action, they get stopped again. Then we start all over. We have belief and time gets involved again. And then we have to decide now, is this still something we want to do? Okay, change management team comes in, says, hey, yeah, you want to do this. It's great. Let's work on your beliefs. Okay, decide you're going to do it again. Make another strategic action. Maybe it's the same strategy, maybe it's a different strategy, but finally, after doing this a number of times, hopefully you get to success. Now, you look at this and you say, okay, all of this that happens is what I would call transformation. So if you have a starting point and an ending point, and you're able to get to that place, you've transformed what you were doing before. So truthfully, people are such part of transformation. They are the key to transformation, at least right now. Now, maybe in the future, that may not be the case. But right now, people are still a really big part of an organization's transformation. So we have to really understand how people do this. And if you look at this process, you'll notice that it looks like it happens in stair steps. And you would think, yeah, well, that makes sense. Probably most everybody operates this way. This is, basically, it's a stair step kind of process. You would be surprised. That's what we thought too. But the truth is, most people do not operate that way. Most people do not make staircase types of adjustments. What we see, we found that there are basically 7 natural patterns of adjustment. And natural means before we do anything to help optimize them if we need to. Now in baseball, we do. So if we look at these types of patterns, we say, okay, we call this one the zipper. Now, of course, we're in baseball, so we're going to use some fun terms. But zipper is someone who is kind of like has hot streaks, hot and cold. So they may not have that stair step. They're fine at first, and then they actually decline in what they're doing. So that's a person with a hot streak. And I'm sure you could think of somebody that you know right now that might be like that as well. Then we have somebody called the maverick. This person just wants to go out and make some adjustments, and then they don't really, they kind of have their own plan, and then next thing you know, they run into something and they have this doubt crash. They're prone to doubt because it didn't work out. So they doubt themselves. They have a timing issue at that point and a belief issue, and finally they're able to kind of regroup and get back to where they were before. And a third one is a steady Eddie. You see, there's really not a whole lot of change, and I showed you one of those before in the picture. Steady Eddie, pretty constant, no change. Now that's great if they're already at a really high level, but if not, that can be difficult on them and their organization. So the interesting thing is, after we looked at all of these patterns, we asked ourselves, how many of these actually affect our organization? And what we found is that over 60% of the population falls under these 3 patterns. And I found this to be very interesting because yesterday I was looking at some data that was put out regarding change management and whatnot, and they found that 62% of people in an organization really don't want to change. So I thought, that's interesting. There is some definite correlations to this. So the bottom line is that for us, the quality and speed of any transformation inside your organization or whatever project that you're working on depends on how well all these types are optimized. Now that to me sounds, you may say that sounds overwhelming. How do you do that? Good question. So what we've done is we've found a way to optimize patterns so that it isn't this huge drain. Without getting into really big detail, I'll give you an overview. There's 3 things that we tend to really look at. That is belief noise, internal timing, and strategy. And it's by using different methodologies that we've learned from the combination of off the field and on the field and how people actually put these things together, we were able to put together some strategies to make this work. So between belief noise, internal timing, and strategy use, it made a huge difference. So I want to tell you, we worked on this with a first-round draft pick. And you would think, well, okay, he's a first-round draft pick, so he's already great at what he does. Very true. But everybody gets to a point. Remember that stopping point? It doesn't matter how good you are at anything. We all get to a point where we have to make some decisions as to, I need to adjust here. So that's the same case with this young man. So we worked on him with we call it the $1 Million Adjustments program. And here's what he said after he had worked on this program for a little while. He said, the MDA program was helpful to me. It allowed me to process things in live time and not become overwhelmed. Now, I highlighted that because most people today are overwhelmed. Most young people today are especially overwhelmed. So it's very important that when we worked through this, he was already overwhelmed, and we had to help him become not so overwhelmed. It says, with any given situation, rather see the given strategy at hand. I was able to remain calmer. I highlighted that one too, because we have a lot of anxiety right now in our culture. And a lot of it is founded in COVID and different things, but all of these transformations and digital changes are causing some of this anxiety. So it's important that we realize that by optimizing, we are able to help players and people remain calm. And when you remain calm, your natural timing is better. So this is why that's a really important aspect. So he's able to remain calmer on the mound and always be on the offensive. Another important point. Do you know how many people are on the defensive? A lot, especially because they don't feel like they have control. So one of the quickest things to put somebody on the defense is when they don't have control. And so what we tried to do with this is to help them understand that the offensive strategies are within their control no matter what they're doing. And so that was a really important point for all of us to understand. We need to teach that as well. Side, which helped the way I pitched. This gave me a different way to think and prepare for games, which I really enjoyed. So how many people in your organization really enjoy their work, what they're doing? I mean, I think it's important that when we note that when we're in a transformation, it's not always that enjoyable. It's sort of causes anxiety and overwhelmed and defensive, all these things that people don't necessarily say, but it's true. But when we tell them and teach them how to make some adjustments, and we use this way of thinking toward transformation, it sort of calms the whole boiling point down. And it allows a transformation to be quicker, believe it or not, and deeper. And what we learned is that there are adjustment skills. Those three things that we talked about are three major skills that we need in order to make adjustments. So that way the coach can talk to the player and everyone can have a higher level of success in what they're doing. Those three major skills are timing, strategy, and information synthesis. And so those are simpler ways of doing things. We actually do it with some interesting brain exercises that we do on certain players, and others we don't. We just do some simpler things, but it can be done in different ways. So I want to just now kind of give you the key takeaways I feel for you. I could tell you a lot more stories and whatnot, but I think it's important that through all of this, how do we synthesize all this information and give you some key takeaways? The first one is that adjustment is a skill set that underlies every transformation. So if you think about what your company is about to do or doing right now to improve and optimize and all these different data points and things that are happening, how are the people handling all that? And how are we paying attention to how they're making those adjustments? And do we have the idea, do we know that this is actually a skill set? Also, I tried to quantify this because everything's quantifiable now, right? So every one big change, like a new digital platform, for example, for every one of those, plan on a minimum of 10 adjustments per person per phase. I think it's important that we have some number because otherwise we don't know what's normal. We say, oh, okay, so we're rolling out this new platform or this new application. How long should it take these people to get this? Should it be 10, and again, it depends on what type they are, but at the same time, it really depends. If you have some number, plan on 10. That way, per phase. So if it's a 3-phase rollout, if it's a 10-phase rollout, if it's a 1-phase, you at least have some benchmark. Now, it may not be perfect for everybody, but if you plan on that, I think it'll give you a sense of relief if things aren't happening as fast as you want, or there's some setbacks here and there. At least you'll understand that. And I think an important thing to note is that performance goes up approximately 15 to 20% when we understand adjustments and optimize them. So that's a pretty significant performance percentage. So when we can use adjustments, we can help people perform their jobs. They may not be million-dollar people or Major League Baseball players, but they still have a job to do, and their performance matters. So when we understand how adjustments work, we can improve performance, which ultimately improves cost and savings. So I guess the biggest question is, what can you do now? I think the very first thing you can do, and you can do it today, is you can use the word adjustment in your corporate vocabulary. I think people resonate with that a little bit better. And that's why we don't say failure or change. Those are the things that people can understand and grab hold of. And that's a word that's a little bit less, causes a little less anxiety. You also want to rethink your human interface timelines when you're implementing automation. So again, this kind of goes back to the 10 adjustments per person, per phase. Think about the human interface and what the timelines you have. So yeah, we throw a new system into the organization, a new data analysis system or what have you, and what are we going to do as a result of that? And that's what where the people come in. So what's our timeline with that? How does that work? So we might need to be rethinking that a little bit. And then educate yourself and others regarding adjustment patterns and how to optimize them. I think this is important. Now, I will actually, I'm in the process of writing some information about this in a book form, and this will be available later, but so unfortunately it's not totally available yet. However, I thought it was important that you can start thinking about it, and you can at least start thinking through what does it mean for you personally, so that when you go into a corporate environment and you're working with other people, at least you'll have some ideas already. So I need to ask you, what's going to be your first $1 million adjustment? What are you going to be actually working on yourself? And I think that is a really great place to start with how you want to think through adjustments and bring it into your organization. And so now I would love to hear from you. Again, you're the first audience that has heard about this tool. And I would love to actually get your feedback and see if you feel this might be helpful for you or your organization through any questions you may have.
Terrific, Linda. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to bring myself up on camera right now. I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your presentation so that the audience can see us. Perfect. Linda, thank you so much. Fantastic presentation. I am monitoring the questions coming in, so please submit your questions as we continue the talk with Linda here. And one of the first themes that have emerged, Linda, have to do with the information synthesis that you talked about. That's a very interesting concept, a very difficult concept, because what you synthesize and how you do it. So can you illustrate a little bit of what that may look like in the context of what you're doing? You know, what type of things you synthesize and how you approach that, because it's a bit of a science and an art. It's not easy to do.
No, synthesizing information requires that you have some information, some context already. You already have some content. You already have some knowledge. Otherwise, you can't really see it as well. So you need to have some basis and some foundational information, so that when you notice that there is something else you need to do or know, you then do a dive into that to understand that as well. So in the case, I'll just use baseball as an example. If there's a player who has a poor batting average, for example, and they're going out to hit the ball, they're going to scan, maybe they're going to have already looked at the pitcher's the way the pitcher throws the ball. They're going to look at the outfielders, who's in place, what are their weaknesses, strengths and weaknesses. They're going to try to place, they're going to make a decision based on those pieces of information, and then they may hit the ball to a certain place based on that if they can. Or maybe if they have a shoulder injury and they already know that, then they have to decide, now I have to hit a different way. So I'm synthesizing all these pieces of information in order to make a progressive and performance-based decision. In any other situation of work, for example, if you have a data stream of information coming in, one of the hardest things to do, I believe, when you have lots of data is to pick out which is the most important piece and how do we act on it. So I think that is maybe partly what you're asking, and if not, please correct me, but data is only as useful as what you're going to use. And so sometimes that's prioritizing our data and saying, how much of this do we need at this moment? And is this really what we need in order to meet our KPIs or our business objectives? What's the big leagues for us? A lot of organizations need to ask themselves that basic question. And then we say, okay, now how do we move our data toward that? Because a lot of information is being collected that isn't necessarily being used at the time, it's just being housed. So how is housed information, what do we really need to use to synthesize in order to be more progressive and to have better performance?
Fantastic, Linda. Thank you for that. Questions continue to come in, and I'm going to be going through as many as those as possible. Frank Harper is saying, great presentation. Thank you. It's a very interesting perspective, insights you have shared. One of the themes I have emerged on the commentary and questions has to do with the size of the adjustment. You talk about $1 million adjustments, and that can feel big in certain contexts or small in different contexts. So a little bit of the question of your thoughts on how do you size the adjustment? We all have this premise that good change management requires you to start small and scale. But when you're thinking about doing these adjustments, how do you size the adjustment? What is too big of an adjustment or too small of an adjustment? And I know it's probably not a perfect science, but how do you approach that?
Well, there's a couple of things I would say to that. First of all, that's why we test it. We test the people, and then we kind of run it against the organization. So what can the organization bear and what can the person bear? So it really kind of depends a little bit. It's kind of like can the market bear when you're talking about investments and whatnot. It's the same as in those types of adjustment. It's understanding adjustment patterns a little bit, so that then okay, what can we actually push? How much can we push our people? That's what I think that may be what you're saying in terms of the size of the adjustment is. What makes sense in terms of pushing people, and they will differ in size depending on if it's their first attempt, their second attempt, their third attempt. It's because that now all of a sudden beliefs come into play and some different things, timing. So it's really important to understand how we're going to start out the gate, but also that it's okay not to make huge adjustments later. Like one of the best patterns we've seen is called the all-star pattern. And what they actually do is they have continued, it's the stair-step pattern. We don't see that very often in the populations, like 20% or less, maybe more like 15%. And they're the ones that actually continually make nice, smooth adjustments. So it could depend, they're not always big ones though. They might be small ones along the way. So it's really kind of hard to know. It's based on your organization. We tend to hire people without any idea of their adjustment patterns. So we have no idea what we really have inside of our organization and how well people can really make those adjustments. And we also don't look at it once they're inside. We look at other metrics, but we don't really look at that one. So right now you'd have to start thinking that through to see what your organization could handle. But most people don't. It can vary depending on who's inside the organization.
Very, very, very good, Linda. You may have mentioned this, and forgive me if I missed it, but I'll ask, how do you assess the patterns? How do you assess some of the potential adjustment approaches you take? Are you doing interviews? Are you doing surveys? Some sort of testing? How you're getting this feedback on the patterns that you have in the organization?
So we started out with a kinesthetic type of test where it was very high touch based. It's since gone to a digital platform, but there's no, what makes our test interesting is there's not a single word on it. And the reason is because we're a global economy and people come from with all different schema on their background, as well as languages and cultures. So the problem with a lot of our older testing models is that they are so heavily reliant on language, and language has bias. Language and culture have bias. So we don't look at that, especially because baseball is so international. We can't do that. So that's why we used a test that has absolutely no bias of language or culture. It's totally 100% performance based. So that is why it's a little different, and we could directly relate it to adjustments.
Very good, very good. We'll go back into a couple of questions from the audience here. The first one is from Gabriela Pereira. Hi, Gabriela, great to have you with us. Gabriela is asking whether there is a benchmark pattern for adjustment duration to reach desired point. I'm not sure if that makes clear sense to you right off the bat. The way I'm interpret that is that, you know, I think you showed that pattern of adjustments. How do you know if your pattern of adjustments is good or bad? Is there some sort of benchmark, or is there qualitative or quantitative assessment of that?
Oh, 100% quantitative, because this is based, we have to have data. So yes, there is a duration. It depends on the patterns, and it also depends on how rich they absorb or the optimization. So optimization does matter for us. We call it optimization. There might be other words that would be better, I don't know, but at this moment, that's what we use. So yes, there is a duration, and it does depend on the pattern, but we have found that that duration is relatively short. That was one of the biggest surprises that I have found, and I think it's because we really look at the timing, the internal chronometer, and no one does that. So I think once we started to share the internal timing, people want to make that time shorter. It automatically becomes an intrinsic motivation versus an extrinsic motivation. So it's not a really long duration, surprisingly.
Fantastic. Another question, this one coming from Tony Benedict, and Tony asks about specific results that you have had before and after, of course, without naming anybody. What is the what have you seen? How do you measure the results, and you know, any good success stories you have had there?
You know, I kicked myself because I actually do have some bar graphs that show the before and after optimizations, and I didn't put it in here. Maybe I can always share that later. But yes, we have worked with people. You saw that first round draft pick. That's one example. But we have many people who, what we do is we take their stats before we work with them, and then we give them the optimization plan, and then we look at their stats after. And we have not had a negative result to date. We still haven't had that's why I feel so passionately about it, because all we do is when we see this, we can numerically see how this is making a difference. So it really resonates. It really clicks with people. That's great. You know, it's very, very qualitative. Well, it's quantitative, but I think it is qualitative as well.
And are those results applicable across all field positions, you know, on a baseball team as an example, or is this more targeted at certain type of roles in the team?
It's anyone. It's just knowing where they're starting with and then helping them to get where they're trying to go. Again, it really has a lot to do with internal chronometers, and people, once they know that, it's a game changer. No pun intended.
That's fantastic. Linda, wonderful to have you with us. I've had the privilege of working closely with Billy Beane and the Oakland A's way back then when Moneyball was being developed and sabermetrics became a thing. And I think it's beautiful that you're looking at the human side of analytics over time, and bringing and continuously evolving the knowledge and understanding of that. So thank you so much for sharing this insights with us. We really appreciate that.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. I hope you'll all go out to a ball game. If we ever get a ball game, I hope you'll go support your favorite team.
Thank you, Linda. Real great to have you with us.
Take
Ladies
care.
and gentlemen, great insights from Major League.
Hello.
Hello. It was so